Thank you for being here. I'd like to recognize some of the folks that did come today. Members of our Legislative Black Caucus, led by our chair, Mr. William Clay. Legislators Norma Chapman and Samuel Fine. And also members of the Albany County Legislature, Joanne Cunningham from Bethlehem, and Ray Joyce, representing the city of Albany. Also representing the Albany County Executive, Bakri Gianna. Also joining us today through our program, we have Pastor McKinley B. Johnson from the Albany African American Clergy for United for Empowerment. We also have Trevon Jackson from the African American Cultural Center here in Albany, a great partner of the legislature. They have amazing programs. They have artwork on display here. The artwork is on display year-round. So enjoy it today, and if you have a chance, they're on Pearl Street here in Albany. Stop in and see all the great things they're doing there. And on February 11th, the Albany County Legislature passed a resolution declaring February as African American History Month. This year, the national theme focuses on black migrations. And our speakers today will be sharing family stories of migration, including their journey right here to Albany County. I'd like to introduce District 6 legislator Sam Fine, who will kick things off with a little history about black migrations. Sam?
Thank you, Andrew. Black migrations follows the continuous movement in the 20th century of African Americans relocating from farms to cities and from the South to the Northeast and Midwest. Such migrations resulted in a more diverse and stratified interracial and intraracial urban population amid a changing social setting, such as the rise of the Garvey movement in New York, Detroit, and New Orleans, the emergence of both black industrial workers and black entrepreneurs, the growing number and variety of urban churches and new religions, new music forms like ragtime, blues, and jazz, white backlash, as in the Red Summer of 1919, and the blossoming of visual and literary arts, as in New York, Washington, D.C., Chicago, and Paris in the 1910s and 1920s. Our speakers today will share some of their personal history about family migrations during this time. But first, please stand as we play the Negro National Anthem.
Facing the rising sun, our day begun. Let us march on to victory.
Today, God is good. All the time, He is good. And I know we're not in church, but I always like to say that because it's true. All right. So I'm going to just start. I'm going to start reading just a little something, and I promise you it won't be long. I wrote a little something last night. I was just thinking. I said, now, what can I say about myself? Because I actually didn't migrate here. I was born and raised here in the city of Albany, which I'm very proud to be here. And I'm proud of this county and what I wanted to just say some words about my mother and my father, because they were not born here in this county. Let me just take you on a little small journey of my life. My mother was born in 1921 to a dressmaker. Well, she called her dressmaker because she was more like a seamstress in Pitts, Georgia. And Pitts, Georgia was like about 150 miles south of Atlanta. So, and back then, 1921, there was probably no roads and all that. And, and you had to use your horse and buggy. And she was born, and my grandfather, he was a sharecropper. And he was also a deacon of Southern Baptist Church. And back then, if you were a deacon, you were just like a pastor. You ran the church. So Deacon John Cole and Ida Cole, which was his wife, Deacon John, when someone would come to the church and they weren't right, he would make sure, my mother said, okay, we're going to have to call a meeting, and he's going to have to go because he just ain't doing right. So those are words that I'm using as my mother would tell me. She always would sit us down and just talk to us about old stories that happened down in the South. Now it was 8 girls and 2 boys, and they were called the Coles. C-O-L-E, not C-O-L-E-S. So these were the Cole girls and the Cole family. And my grandfather owned, it was a slaughterhouse, they called it, where it was cattle, pigs, and chickens. And what he would do is they would take the meat, and you probably know something, some people might know a little bit about it, but I guess they would take the pigs and hang them up, and then they would cure them and put all this stuff with them. And anyway, but he would sell it. This is how they made their living. And as the grandmother was making the clothing, she sold for it was most of the, I'll say, white people, I'm sorry, because they're the ones that had the money. I'm just gonna keep it real. They had the money, and so they would come to Miss Ida, and Miss Ida would have that old sewing iron of, and she would just be making those clothes, and they would bring their books from Sears Roebuck's. I'll never forget that, Sears Roebuck's, and they would bring the book, and they would, Miss Ida, I want to look like this, I want to dress like this. But, for some reason, I guess that was her gift, because she would actually make them come out, and they really thought they looked good. Those clothes actually was fit and looked just like the ones in the book. So those are some of the things, like there was segregation, but if you were respected, if you had a family and you were respected back then, everybody respected each other. It wasn't, name calling and all this fighting and carrying on, because everyone was called Mr. and Miss, Mr. and Miss. So Mr. Johnny and Miss Ida and Mr. John and Mr. Sam and Miss Susie, everybody had a name, and this is what they were called, and they were all respected. So I remember one time, one of the stories was that they had went to, and I'm not even reading this now because I know it by heart, I've heard it so much. They went to town. So I guess going to town was going to the big city, somewhere, excuse me. And it was the Cole girls was inside of the car. And they went to town to go shopping or something, and they were surrounded around a whole lot it was some white boys that surrounded them, because now, remember, most people had horse and buggies and wagons and so forth, but they were in a car. So they went to town and they were surrounded. And when they were surrounded, I guess they were like making fun of them or whatever, and next thing you know, it was the person that came out and he said, "Wait a minute. That's the Cole girls. That's Mr. John's girls." And they said, "Oh," they all backed away. And everything was just all good, because that's what happened when you were in a town where everything was segregated. But if you were respected, you got that respect. And that was one of the things that really stuck with me, is because of having respect for people, for one another. So as they migrated, my mother went to the 11th grade. And if you were in the 11th grade, you can teach others. You went to your school. She went to Cordell, Georgia, and she was teaching the children that were in K through the 2nd grade. It wasn't like the kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd. You had to have several grades, but you were teaching those kids. And when she did that, that was something that was very, very. She loved that. Everybody would call her Miss Lois, Miss Maggie, and Miss Cole, and they really thought that, she was very, very proud of that. She tells that story several times. So then she moved to Albany, New York. When she came to Albany, she lived with my uncle, which was Mary, and he had his family. But people were trying to migrate from the South to come up north, which you're going to hear Elder McKinley tell some of that, I know. But when she came up north, she stayed with my aunt and my uncle, and that didn't last that long, because, if you're staying with your relatives and you're staying with a sister-in-law, sometimes things like that don't work so hot, because she was very, very close to her brother. He was 7 years older, and she just adored her brother. So anytime they would get into an argument, she would have to go inside the room and close the door, because she didn't want to be involved into that family feud. So she finally moved out on her own. And I thank God for that, because when she moved out on her own, she became working at Williams Press, which is located, it used to be located They made books out on Broadway here in Albany. And then there was a ball factory here in Albany. I think it was on Orange Street. And they made the gloves and they made the balls, all the leather on these machines. And it was all piece. You did it by piecemeal. You'd have to find out. I guess they would like add up how many you made, how many gloves you made, and that's how they were paid. So she came from a hard working, and she came to Albany, and she worked very hard. When she met my dad was one of these people that, he was a gentleman that came from South Carolina, but he moved from South Carolina at that very young age of 12. His mom had passed. He moved with his older brother, and they moved to Schenectady. And when he moved to Schenectady, they became, they were like doing salespeople. They were salesmen. They came to Albany and were selling Fuller Brush. I don't know if some people might have heard that name, Fuller Brush. They were doing Fuller Brush, and they came along, and he met my mom going door to door. And I guess they took a liking to each other, but not right away, because she was very, very afraid of people here in this big city, you know, and she couldn't understand why people lived in the basements, because basements was like you were being thrown away or like you're in a dungeon or something. So she just couldn't understand none of that stuff. But when they met, they got together, and I'm trying to hurry up now because I got a lot here written, but I'm not going to go on. And when they got together and they had my sister, it's just two of us, me and my sister, and she's much older than I am. She's not here. She's much older than I am. So when they got, and then they did not want to have another child, but then I came along. She told me, she said, well, Barbara was so quiet, and she was so, you just always just wanted to have a child like her. She was so sweet. But then I came along, and I made up for Barbara, myself, and probably 10 other kids in the neighborhoods. But here I am, and I am just so proud of being here. But let me just go on, because I work for, I'm skipping along. I see Andrew's probably giving me the eye. But I work for New York State, right next, well, it was at the Smith Building, and now we're at 110. It was for the Comptroller's Office for over 37 years. It was a very job. It paid the bills. I had my 6 children. Thank God for maternity leave. And I had 6 children, and 6 beautiful children. 3 of them are here today. But we worked with reporting control, make sure that your retirement monies was all registered went to the right fund, so you weren't gypped out of your monies as you get ready to retire. So it was a lot of things like that happened where people did not have their retirement monies, the 3% or whatever tier that you were in, being equaled. And I just, I thank God for that. And then as I was there, someone just kept talking to me, and I was always doing some other things other than my job. I can say that now because I'm retired. So when I was doing some other things, and it was always things for the community and just working with people, because I love people. I talk a lot. I love to help people. And this person said to me, you really need to get into politics. I'm like, politics for what? And she kept on every day. She was always in my ear. And she's in my ear. And I thank God for her, because she was the person that made me realize that things that I need to say, I can try to help someone. And with the old song of Mahalia Jackson, if I can help somebody along the way, my living will not be in vain. I could sing that because I go to Sweet Pilgrim Church. I'm with the praise team. And this person started a nice choir at the OSC ensemble, and we were going along really hard, really good, and we had a nice choir going on and so forth. And I just thank her, because she did give me she instilled that into me to say, well, Norma, you really need to do and take it further. So when I when I ran in 2007, I was really quite nervous, but I did it, and I thank God, because I was able to work on a social services committee, and The Mass Transit Committee, but was the Social Service Committee, was working with people that always had questions and things that they wanted to know more about, and they could not go and just go to your caseworker, because the caseworker is there just to work on your case, but not to give you some information, what you should do this or what you should do that. So I was able to be that liaison to be able to communicate to the commissioners about what was going on in certain cases. And I was glad to do things like that. The mass transit program with CDTA is another program that was very good, because you can also work with people that we need more transportation and need more equal transportation to be able to provide for our constituents and for the communities. I worked with the Audit and Finance Committee. I worked with, how many more committees I worked with? I've worked with so many. Andrew, you probably could help me with that. But anyway,
Center Chair.
oh yeah, oh yes. And I was the Civic Center Chair for over, how much was it, $20 million? That program, I was the chair of that, and it was very, very important, that Civic Center, and you can see how the new phase has come over with the Times Union, and we're really proud of that. Let's get that. That's good. Yeah, a lot of things. A lot of people are always complaining about, they say, well, oh, you can hear the noise, it's just so loud on the streets, but it's advertisement, and it's also to let people know what's going on. And I really appreciate that very much, Chair. I really appreciate that, because people that are coming into our neighborhoods, they're always wondering, well, where is this Times Union place? Where is this at? And what's going on there? So they don't even have to look at the internet, wherever, because it's there and it's visible, and they see what's going on. So, we want to thank for that, and Public Works for better highways, roads, and some of the other programs that I was working on, and I'm just trying to speed on here because I know my time is about up, and I see somebody walking out of the room now because she's probably getting bored. I'm just joking. But, so just to say that this is just some of the stories that I have, and I just wanted to let people know, and I just love the fact that Wanda and Mr. Clay have started with us, with the caucus, the minority caucus, because this is one thing that's very good, and it's something that we all need here for the county of Albany. And that person that I was speaking about that just really kept getting into my ear is Wanda Willingham.
Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I'd be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. I started with that song because it's something that really signifies the reason why we're here today. I'm just going to give a very brief history of my family. My great-grandfather's name was King McLaughlin. My great-great-grandfather's name was Raz McLaughlin. And these were two white men, blue-eyed. One of them fought in the Civil War, and the other one died in my aunt's arms. And in those days, people took the names from the families that they had been given down to. My grandmother was a McCann. There are some people in the audience who can relate to that. And my father and my grandfather, they were McLaughlins. One of the things that I can remember about actual migration, I was born in the South in a house. My oldest brother, was also born in the South. But my father had decided that he was going to leave Mississippi and move to New York. In between his travels, One of my sisters was born in Albany, New York, my older sister, as a matter of fact. My father's trip back south, that's how I was born in Waynesboro, Mississippi. My grandfather was fortunate to have bought a lot of land, and you could say he had over 300 acres at one point, which was a lot in those days. At any rate, when my father decided to leave and move north, he felt he could make a better way for his family. And the story is that he told my grandfather, he bought him a tractor, and he said, "I'm not coming back. I'm going to make my way in New York." So one of the things that we would do every year was go back and forth. I'm just going to tell this one story. We would go back and forth. Every Christmas, every summer, we would travel south. And I can remember as a little girl going into a store. I had gotten away from my father. And I went in this store, and I was waiting for them. I had decided what the candy that I wanted to buy. And the shopkeeper would not wait on me. I couldn't figure out why she wouldn't wait on me. I picked out my candy, and the other thing that bothered me was she was in front of me, and then she moved down. But I was only a little girl. I don't think I probably was any more than 5 years old. When I say I had really gotten away from my father, I didn't really realize how devastating that could have been at that time as a kid. You know how we wander off. My father came running into the store, and he apologized to the woman. And what had happened, I was standing under the white sign. I didn't know it. And the reason why the woman had moved, she wanted me to move down to the colored sign. But I didn't know that. And as my father apologized to these people for me being under the wrong sign, I still didn't know what to make of it. I didn't realize or understand why my father was so nervous, because I had never seen my father shook. And I remember him telling her she doesn't know and she doesn't understand. And that was something that stuck with me. And it was because of the look on my father's face and the people who had begun to look at me. I tell this story, and I guess right now, so I understand why my father wanted us out of the South. So that's what I'm going to share as far as my migration and a reason why people left the South. There'll be others that will come behind me that can really give a real story of what we would call the Black Moses for Albany, New York. And he'll tell that, Pastor McKinley will tell that story later. But as you look at us, all of us have reasons on why we are here today. I know why I am here today. I know how I got here today. And I just thank God that my mother and father were raised by people who taught them that there was something better and that they could be more. And even though they only had 8th grade educations, they went on to own their own businesses because that's what people had to do. Even though we were up north, or as we call it, up south, Albany was still very much segregated, even right here in the city of Albany. And so people did have to start their own businesses. They started their own churches. As blacks moved in, whites moved out. But to tell you the truth, I grew up in a neighborhood that was Italian, Jewish, and black. And it's right here, within 2 blocks of this whole area here. South Pearl Street, Grand Street, Elm Street, Eagle Street, and Bassett Street, Franklin Street. Come on, help me out. Ash Grove Place. What? Trinity, that's right, Trinity Place. Everything that you see down here was at one point a very mixed neighborhood. And so I'm going to take my leave here and let Pastor McKinley and also the chairman of our legislature talk about their experiences, and I'll come back up to you later. Thank you.
Well, they used all the time, so I don't have any time left. But particularly my legislator, Norma Chapman, I mean, she sort of walked us back through history to the present, but I think both of them, both Wanda, our deputy vice, or our deputy chairperson of our legislature, and also with the members that are present, I'm sort of, I have mixed emotions where the rest of my group is. But those that are present, would you stand? The Legislative Black Caucus. There's only, and there's what, 3 missing? And I don't know where they are. But certainly I'm not going to apologize for them. They should be here. So I don't have stories of migration, but what comes to mind when I listen to Wanda is one story. I've been here, I've been an Albanian since I was about 5 years old. But very vivid in my imagination or in my mind is one story that is always present with me and one that sort of reminded me of that in her stories. And that was when I was 6 years old. I went to visit my grandparents who all came from Arkansas, Little Rock, Arkansas. And I went to visit my grandmother, and she took me shopping over in the city in Little Rock. We lived right in Little Rock, and I got sick. I had what turned out to be walking pneumonia, and my grandmother said, "Well, son, we have to go home. I have to get you to the doctor. You have a lot of fever. You have high fever, so." And bearing to mind, I was just, I think, five or six. We got on the bus, and what one of the things Wanda said reminded me of this. We got on the bus, and the bus was full all the way up to, any of you have been in the South years ago, you know what the bus looked like. There was a big white line in the wherever they drew the line on the bus, which meant that blacks were to stand back beyond that line. You couldn't cross that line. And up front, so the back of the bus was full. And up front was completely empty. And so my grandmother said, "Well, sons, there's no seats back here, so sit here." It was the first seat on the white side of the line. And so she set me down, and I was really, really sick. And the bus driver refused to move the bus, and he came back and he said, "You got to move from where you are." And my grandmother said, "Well, there's no seats, and my grandson is sick." He said, "I don't care. You got to get on the other side of that white line on the floor." And so, there's a little bit of some of the black people on the bus started to protest. And a black gentleman got up and said to my grandmother, "Miss, set him in my seat, and I will stand up." And that's how we went to where we had to get off the bus in Little Rock, Arkansas. And I'll tell you that things like that always remain with you. It remained with and one of the things Wanda said is, One of the reasons people migrated to the north from the south was because of those kinds of issues. White only signs. Going to the back of, you couldn't go into a restaurant. You had to go to the back in order to get your food. I could go on and on about those kinds of issues, but thank God where the country have came from that. Now, that's not to say that we don't still have racism. That's not to say that we have a perfect society at this point, but it is to say that we have moved a long ways. And, I could give you my history in Albany as I grew up, which is a very positive one. And here I stand today, a legislator from the 12th district, representing a majority-minority district. What does that mean? That means that the district that I represent is predominantly white. But they put me in office for 16 years. And someone from the Time Union a few years ago said to me, well, Mr. Clay, what do you attribute your success to? A black man being elected in essentially a white district, what do you attribute that to? And, the only thing I could think of was Dr. King. And what I thought of was that, I thank God that I believe that people elected me on the basis of my character, not my color. And that's been the case, again, for some 16 years. So I'm very thankful. And I'm not about to say, and I'm not going to get any place and say that we have a color-free society today, because we don't. Again, I'm very thankful for God. I don't want to get back into Norma and start preaching. I thought she was going to preach that when she got up. As you have, as Wanda Willingham, who also sung a very gospel, a very religious song, you can see that we're all steeped, and essentially black people history is steeped in religion. That's where we get our belief, and that's what has brought us so far. God's been good to us, and I'm very thankful of that. Now, I'm not going to take any more of your time. I guess I'm scheduled to talk about some of the accomplishments of the Legislative Black Caucus, so I'm going to close with this and turn it over to the real speaker of the hour. But let me just close by saying, one, I thank you, those of you that came out here. We made a terrible mistake. The mistake was that we followed, by having our program at the end of the month, we sort of followed other programs that was here. And so those people, and it was about migration, so those people are not here today. So consequently, we just don't have the kind of audience that I would love to have seen. But I thank all of you for being here. Those of you that are here, I thank you. Now, there are a couple of legislators. Gil Ethia, did you leave? Is he gone? But Paul is here. Paul Miller. Paul, please stand up. Joe, where's Joe? Please. Huh? Did I miss somebody?
Ray and Joanne.
Ray and Joanne. Yes. And these are, please stand up. Let people see who you are. These are our fellow legislators. Thank you for coming out and supporting us. We appreciate it. Now, I'm going to close by saying the Chairman Joyce was gracious enough to support us this past year. There's never been a legislative black caucus in the Albany County. And what we have today is the first of its kind in Albany County. And it can be attributed to those that Chairman Joyce, to Wanda Willingham, and to others, to other legislators, Joanne, Paul, all of those, Ray, all of those supported us. And when we put together the Legislative Black Caucus in the form of a resolution, it was unanimously passed by the legislature, unanimously. And we have enjoyed the support of the legislator, and again, I don't want to overemphasize, but Chairman Joyce has been right there with us, behind us. He's given us the resources. He's been behind me and whatever I've tried to do, and I thank you, Chairman. Thank you. With that, Elder, the man of the hour, Elder McKinley Johnson.
Well, we can say amen. Amen. We can even clap our hands. Yeah. Give it. Well, that is the culture of many of the background of many of us black is church life. For God has brought us from a long ways. Not on us, but everybody. Anybody that would turn to him and ask him for help, he is there to help them. It's just a joy to be asked to come to this session today. I thank Sister Wanda for calling me up. Thank you at the last minute, but we appreciate it. And we thank God for Chairman Joyce and all the black legislators caucus. There's nothing wrong with that because we're trying to unify to help do the things that will bless not just one set of people, but everybody. Can I get an amen? Amen. All right. I don't know why they put me on a spot like this, but they want me to share and talk about the Great Migration and how my father, who was in that Great Migration, come to Albany. In many cases, they called him the modern-day Harriet Tubman and the Black Moses because he brought so many people out of a sharecropper experience that was as slavery or right next to it. For they had, after working all year long and slaving in the fields and pulling up the cotton or whatever it is, that they came out with a great big thank you, but no money. They always ended up empty-handed somehow or another because when they went to the store to buy products and needs for their family, it was at the end of the year, they had to come back and find out what did they owe, and they always owed more. That's a terrible experience that many of the blacks had in the South. My father was a unique, unusual man that lived in the South. He was born in 1909. He was born to mother and father that was unusual and different. Instead of being in the sharecropper experience, they had a 150-acre farm that they used to make their existence and their living in. My father, he came up, he was very industrious and very moral and very straight and very honest. Even as a teenager, he was listed in the community of Shabuta, Mississippi. Yep, that's where it was. Shabuta, Mississippi. I have to ask people where I go sometime, anybody got any relatives from Shabuta? And but it was where he came up, was raised up. One of 16 children. You know, in them days, they needed children, guess what for? To work that farm, to make sure that they get what their products they were good. Now, he not only was that, at one time, he became the manager of that farm because his dad was incapacitated for about 9 months, and my father, at 16 years old, took over the farm, managed it with all his brothers and sisters. The older boys, a couple of them, they have already left and left home, but he learned to manage his mom, his sisters, and his siblings. And I suspect that God's way of helping him get some development, get some growth in the area that he was going to pursue when life got a little better. By the grace of God, at around the age of 21, he came to the city of Albany. He came up south. That's right, that's what we called it. Up south, because in the south there was rigidness and experiences of segregation, experiences of racism, that really was cruel, it was kind of mean, and etc. He told me, he said, I would never marry anybody in the South and raise my children in the South, or have a wife that might be abused or challenged or thought of as less than a normal human being. He said, I would never do that. So he never was married in the South, but he did a lot of good in the South. In his community, he would go around in a buggy, and get clothes and furniture from the wealthy people or whoever was better off, and he would take it into the community that he lived and distribute it to those that didn't have as much, didn't have what they needed, so to speak. He was always helping his community. He was known as a young man that could be trusted with the girls in his community. Their mamas wouldn't let him go nowhere unless Jack was with him, because of his standard, because of his fervor, because of his honesty, because of who he was. And when he came to Albany around, he was 21, it was 1931, he only had a couple of shirts, a couple of pants, and a nice jacket and a pair of shoes. But he arrived here in a car he was one of 16 people in that car, with the pastor that had come down to start migrating people up to the north from the south. You say, how did they get 16 in there? Well, this pastor had a 3-row car. And, we now have 2 rows. But now he had 3 rows at the Subarus. And he stacked them where he was, and everybody had somebody in the seat. And it was only 1,300 miles from Shibuya to Albany, New York. And my father was one of those 16. But he was energetic and industrious, and he learned how to get out and find work wherever he could. He worked by washing walls and washing ceilings and washing insides and out. Anything he'd find to make some money to do what he had to do. Well, after a while, he got married and married my mother, and there were 7 children. I'm the oldest of the last 6 living. And he has shown us a lot to look forward to and to serve the people. In Albany, he began to go back down to Mississippi and other places and bring others up during the migration period from the south to the north. And the way he did it, he had to do it in a way because there was sharecropper employers that didn't like Brother Jack because he was taking their sharecropper employees out of the south back to up to the north. How he would do it, he'd leave Albany about late Thursday night. And it's 1,300 miles to get down to where he had to go. He'd leave at Thursday because he works all week. And he works on 2 jobs, and then he developed an industry of his own, repairing houses and doing all that carpentry work and etc. But he would leave Thursday and go down to Mississippi. And when we get there, the word got around, Jacksontown. And they knew what that meant. He was going to leave town. And if you wanted to go to Albany, you got to be ready when he called. They asked the question, when should I be ready? When you hear the horn. When I toot, 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 you better come a running because I'm going to sure be flying. And about 1 o'clock in the morning to 2 o'clock in the morning, he would stop by some of the houses that had said, I want to go to Albany. He would say, get your rags together and meet me at that time. And they would come out, jump in the car, and he'd scoot out. The reason why it was that late at night is because those folks that they were working for, and all they get in the end was somewhere to live, they didn't want to lose their cheap labor. Hello, somebody. That's the reason with slavery anyhow. Just want a cheap labor so I could make $1 million. All right, I don't want to get into that. Brother Jack is what they called him. Sometimes I hear people say, Bro Jack. Instead, we call him Brother Jack because he loved the community, he worked for the community, he helped out in every instant that he could. When he got here, he started to establish what is called a Good Samaritan group of that was for Albany County. Let me tell you, he stayed down in the South End more time. That's where we came in. Well, that's no more than anybody else. When the Jewish people came, they stayed in the South End. Italians came and stayed in the South End. Everybody stayed around the river. Then they scooted up the hill, so to speak. And certainly the blacks landed and they stayed around the river, which was down here on Green Street, Rensselaer Street, and all the streets they were talking about. Listen, honestly, God has blessed in a mighty way, and he was very helpful. He would not only bring people up, but Brother Jack would go to his friend, Albert and Kirsch. Anybody ever heard of them? Yes. Millionaire realtors that will have what you call no down payment houses. The houses were dilapidated. Brother Jack would work for him a few years instead of started buying houses because he was bringing people up. They had to go somewhere to live. And then he met up with Father Peter Young, and they hooked up together, and they would provide clothes and the necessities for all the people coming up. I guess they went to some of the officials in Albany and told them, it's time, Jack, to stop doing all. Don't keep bringing these people up. But he was a migrator, and he brought people up. Don't want to last long because I believe Sister Chapman rang the bell on that one, but in the great migration that Reverend Lewis Parson did, it started way back in the late 20s, right on up till he died in 1940. My father took up the load going back and forth until about the 70s to bring up over 100 families. Not only did he bring them up, but he gave them a job, or helped them find a job, fed them. He made some of us get out of our bed and let them sleep in our beds. We slept on the floor so that somebody that was coming from somewhere, you can see that all of that kind of experience, unless you got no feelings at all, is going to rub off on you. So that our thoughts in life was not only to live right, but to serve God's people in the community. That's all I know all of my life. That's all I wanted to know. That's all I'm trying to know. And I'm sure that comes from being brought up by a man that not only loved God, but loved the people. And I want to say to all of us that are here, we had an opportunity to experience him, or either you heard about him and he didn't do it for himself. He did it so that men and women, boys and girls, will get a sense that they have a responsibility, that we have a way of doing that God has set out for them to do, and that is to honor him, God, and help people. It pays off. It's suffering sometimes. It hurts sometimes, but we have to help one another. And Reverend Johnson, Brother Jack, they call them, done that with all his heart and all his mind and with all his soul. And I'm encouraging all of you, no matter what you are or where you live or where your experience is, the migration, because there was a lot of people that come from down south. It was a lot of, I think there was 92% of the South back in 1901 or so was not a blacks. It was about 92% of the blacks was there. But by, I think it was, about 1920, they were down to only 53% of the blacks was in the South. They had moved to Chicago, moved to New York, move to Albany, move to the urban centers in the United States, and we have a responsibility to keep on doing all the good that we can while we can. He taught it until I caught it.
This has really been an incredible experience today. But we have one last speaker for you. As I look around the room, I know you see a lot of us, we're older and we can speak to different experiences, but we're also experiencing something new today. We talked about just briefly the Legislative Black Caucus, but there's something that I do want to say. Andrew, I really have to give you credit for having a vision that a lot of people did not share. The Legislative Black Caucus, I had asked member after member to allow us to have staff that would see to the needs of minority wards, not only wards, but legislative districts. And I was ignored. You listened, and you did something about it. I look back and I see John A. Bakri back here, and it just does something to me to see our younger people coming along, taking the mantle, and actually doing something with it. And for that, I applaud you. But now I have a young man, and his name is Trayvon Jackson. Last year, the legislature gave a few dollars to the African American Cultural Arts Center, and it was something that was very worthwhile. It's something that is new and exciting in the city of Albany and in Albany County. I'm going to let him tell you about it, but this is another young person that we are bringing along to continue this journey of migration, but also the experience of what being an African American is all about in Albany County.
So I want to thank everyone who could be here, and again, thank all the legislators, Chair, for having us here to speak on behalf of the center, but also to bring some of this art down and get exposure to some local artists. So please, if you haven't had the time already, please check out these works, appreciate the artists, look at the names, and they're on display regularly down at the center. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge my Vice President, Jeff Bonilla, on stage with me. This is the gentleman that makes all the art run, corresponds with the artists, and anyone who's dealt with artists before knows how hard of a job that can be. So I personally want to give you an applause, and thank you. So to speak a little briefly about myself, my name is Trayvon Jackson. I'm actually a native of Troy. Any other Trojans here besides Jeff? Okay, no, hard crowd. So I actually was born and raised in Troy and went down to Atlanta for college at Morehouse College. And I guess you could say my migration went in reverse. I went down south and saw a totally different world, where a marching band is a marching band, where a promenade is a promenade, where a plantation is a plantation, right? And you see those lessons, and for me, the easiest thing to do was to find a job, find some income, get out. That's how I would kick over all the new things I was seeing, how I would deal with the old feelings that I had. That's how I would make it. So I went out to Chicago, migrated again. Went a little further west, and I worked in investment banking for a little while, and the money felt great, but my heart didn't. My heart didn't. And that lasted for under a year before I quit, without a job in hand, but with my faith in the other, and I was able to get a job. And I came back, and I was working in local development, and the piece that bothered me about local development was the mission and the impetus for supporting minorities and women and other owned ventures was there on paper and at the forefront and on the marquees. But then when I would look at the financials, when I would look at the money that was being given out, it wasn't there. The entire time I was working, not a single woman or minority-owned business came across my desk locally. I said, that bothers me. That bothers me. So I formed my own firm. development, property development, advising, and I figured if there's a way we can make it work, we can do it on our own. So we started Blue Light Development Group, and Jeff was gracious enough to serve as vice president. And in that time, I was serving on the board at the African American Cultural Center. And before I left for college, I remember the initial interest meetings they used to have down at Trinity, when it was still an idea, when it was still a concept. And I came back from college, and it was done. There was a building. There was a space. I said, this is amazing. I'd love to get involved. I'd love to help. And as I volunteered for a couple years, we ran up against some hard problems. It was great that we had a space. It was great that I felt better about what I was doing, and it was great that I found an outlet, but bills still have to be paid, right? Those day-to-day operations, coordinating with those artists, making sure the floors are mopped and clean, right? My grandmama taught me that. So you begin to say, how do we do these things? And as we're figuring that out and getting traction and doing more art exhibits, our boiler breaks, right? And anybody who's been in the New York winter or any winter north of some of the places we're talking about migrating from, it gets cold real fast, right? Especially when you're lucky/cursed enough to have really tall ceilings, right? In a historic building right in downtown. So the county was gracious enough to meet us where we were and say, how can we help, right? And helped with a very pretty penny to make sure that we could get a new boiler system installed. And I'm happy to say that that system is installed, keeping us very warm this winter. Yes. And now with that heat and that warmth on top of all the other initiatives, there's another kind of migration going on. And that's people coming to our space, right? That's people realizing that these resources are here, and with a little bit of stability, with a little bit of buy-in, either from the county or other individuals, this resource can be here every day. And all we have to do is pour into it a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. But if everybody's pouring in a little bit, sooner or later our cup's going to overflow, right? Sooner or later our cup is going to overflow. So I thank everyone who's been patient enough to stick with their migration, personal or otherwise, to still be here, because just because you've been here a long time doesn't mean you have to continue to be here a long time. I thank everyone who chose to come back and stay and help, and I'm waiting and excited for the day when our cup overflows. Thank you all.
That was great. We get to hear, I guess I would say, part of the end of the story. And so we went all the way back up to the present, and we're still on the journey. So I just want you all to know I'm truly humbled to be among all of you today. And we do have some minority-owned businesses here. I want to thank Allie B's for this amazing lunch that they gave. And for those of you that have not partaken, I do believe that there is some left. But I'm so glad that we were able to host an event where we could learn more about the impact of the histories that people have who live here right now, and what an important role our parents and grandparents had on us in our communities and the state, and our nation. Thank you, Pastor McKinley, for coming out and sharing the experience of Black Moses. I know Black Moses, and I know that station wagon that he's talking about, because he used it to open up the daycare center, and they would go around and they would pick up, instead of 16, it would be at least 30 kids in that station wagon, taking them into, I believe, one of the first daycare centers, established daycare centers in the city of Albany. So I want to thank you for that. I just want you to know that, you're a leader in our African American community today. And I applaud you all for what you are doing, because this is something that really means a lot to me. I love the history of my family. I love the history of my fellow people, whether they're white or black. There's some things that you hope that you never experience. But I had a friend who turned out to be the godmother of my daughter. Her father was lynched in Mississippi. So we're all a culmination of the experiences that we have. And these are the reasons why we do some of the things that we do today. And every now and then we have to be reminded of what we have gone through in life to make sure as we move forward to the future, we take those experiences with us and do things that is going to make it better for the people of the next day. I brought my great-grandson with me today. You know, you always get stuck. Sometimes kids think that you don't have a job. I have a job. But at any rate, school is out, we know that. And I wish we could have filled this place up with those kids that are out of school so they could have heard some of these stories that were told today. So right now, I want to thank each and every one of you for attending this event. And so we're all going to get together for a group photo and finish eating the food that is here. Thank you all for coming out.